Look at a map of Africa today, a tapestry of nations, each with its own history and identity. From the deserts of the Sahara to the rainforests of the Congo, the diversity is astounding. But have you ever wondered how these borders came to be? How did these lines, which now define countries, come into existence? The lines, often straight as a ruler, seem arbitrarily drawn. They cut across mountains, rivers, and even communities. With little regard for the natural or human landscape, they tell a story of a continent carved up, not by its own people, but by foreign powers. These lines were drawn in distant capitals, far removed from the realities of African life. This is the story of the Scramble for Africa. A period in the late 19th century when European powers, hungry for resources and driven by imperial ambition, descended upon the continent. They carved it up amongst themselves with little regard for the people who called this land home. The rich cultures and histories of African societies were ignored. They carved it up amongst themselves with little regard for the people who called this land home. The rich cultures and histories of African societies were ignored. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 85 stands as a stark symbol of this era. It was here that the fate of an entire continent was decided. In a grand hall in Germany, European diplomats gathered. They were not explorers or scholars of Africa, but politicians and businessmen with their own agendas. Their mission: to divide the African continent like a cake, drawing lines on maps that would have profound and lasting consequences. These lines would shape the future of millions. What's most astonishing is the absence of African voices in this fateful meeting. No African leaders were present to speak for their people or their lands. Imagine deciding the fate of a continent without even consulting its inhabitants. The decisions made in that room would echo through history, affecting generations to come. This was the harsh reality of colonialism. The borders drawn then still impact Africa today, influencing everything from politics to social structures. Europe's interest in Africa was far from new. For centuries, the continent had been a land of mystery and allure for European adventurers and traders. Traders had long sought after African riches, gold, ivory, spices. These commodities were highly prized in European markets, driving early exploration and trade routes. But the late 19th century marked a turning point. The political landscape of Europe was changing, and with it the ambitions of its nations. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and European factories demanded raw materials. The hunger for resources was insatiable, driving nations to look beyond their borders. Africa, with its vast untapped resources, became the target. The continent's wealth in natural resources was seen as the key to fueling industrial growth. Rubber, diamonds, gold, copper. These were the prizes that fueled the engine of European imperialism. The race to claim these resources was fierce and relentless. But the scramble wasn't just about resources. It was also a contest of power and influence among European nations. It was about power, prestige, and the misguided belief in European superiority. Nations sought to expand their empires, believing it would elevate their status on the world stage. European powers saw themselves as bringing civilization to Africa. They viewed their mission as a noble endeavor. Despite the exploitative nature of their actions, they used this as a justification for conquest and exploitation, masking their greed with a thin veneer of paternalism. The rhetoric of civilizing missions was a convenient cover for their true intentions. Missionaries fanned out across the continent seeking converts to Christianity. They believed they were saving souls, often unaware of the cultural richness they were displacing. They believed they were saving souls, often blind to the rich tapestry of existing African cultures and beliefs. The imposition of foreign values disrupted traditional ways of life. The stage was set for a dramatic and tragic chapter in African history. The scramble was on, and the consequences would be profound and lasting. The consequences of colonial rule were devastating and far-reaching. African societies, with their diverse cultures and traditions, were torn apart. Traditional systems of governance were replaced with European administrations. This disruption had a profound impact on African social structures, often leaving people feeling lost and disenfranchised. Colonial economies were designed to benefit the colonizers, not the colonized. Resources were extracted and shipped to Europe, enriching the colonial powers while leaving Africa depleted. Africans were forced into labor on plantations and in mines, often subjected to brutal treatment and inhumane conditions. Perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of colonialism is the creation of artificial borders. The lines drawn in Berlin paid little heed to existing ethnic or linguistic boundaries. This disregard for African realities sowed the seeds of future conflicts. The story of colonialism in Africa is not just a story of victimhood. It is a complex narrative that intertwines suffering with resilience, oppression with defiance. It's also a story of resilience, of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. African leaders and warriors stood tall, embodying the spirit of resistance. Across the continent, Africans rose up to resist colonial rule. They organized uprisings, formed alliances, and fought battles to reclaim their sovereignty. They fought back against the seizure of their land, the exploitation of their people, and the assault on their cultures. The struggle was not just physical, but also cultural and spiritual. The Zulu kingdom, under the leadership of King Shaka, presented a formidable challenge to British expansion in South Africa. Shaka's innovative military strategies and the fierce determination of his warriors became legendary. Their military prowess, honed through years of internal conflict, inflicted early defeats on the British. These victories were not just tactical but symbolic, representing a stand against imperial domination. Though ultimately defeated, the Zulu resistance stands as a testament to African bravery and military skill. Their legacy continues to inspire future generations. In Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik II led his forces to a stunning victory against Italian invaders at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. This battle was a turning point in African history. This victory, a beacon of hope for colonized people across Africa, ensured Ethiopia's continued independence. It was a powerful statement that African nations could defend their sovereignty. It shattered the myth of European invincibility. The triumph at ADWA resonated far beyond Ethiopia, inspiring resistance movements across the continent. From the Ashanti Empire in West Africa to the Maji Rebellion in German East Africa, acts of resistance, both big and small, punctuated the colonial period. These acts were expressions of a deep-seated desire for autonomy and justice. These stories of defiance remind us that the human spirit, even in the face of oppression, yearns for freedom. The echoes of resistance continue to reverberate, reminding us of the enduring quest for dignity and self-determination. Section 5, The Long Shadow of Colonialism. The end of World War II marked the beginning of the end of colonial rule in Africa. Across the continent, independence movements gained momentum, fueled by a desire for self-determination. One by one, African nations broke free from the grip of colonialism, reclaiming their hard-won independence. But, the legacy of colonialism cast a long shadow. The economic systems put in place during the colonial period often benefited the former colonial powers at the expense of newly independent nations. Political instability, fueled by artificial borders and weak institutions, plagued many countries. Section 6, a legacy of broken promises. The promises of development and progress that often accompanied independence proved elusive. Many African nations found themselves trapped in cycles of poverty, conflict, and corruption. The scars of colonialism ran deep, impacting everything from education and healthcare to infrastructure and economic development. The challenges faced by post-colonial Africa were immense. Rebuilding nations shattered by decades of colonial rule was a daunting task. The lack of investment in education and infrastructure during the colonial period left many African countries ill-equipped to compete in the global economy. Section 7, The Seeds of Conflict. The artificial borders drawn during the Scramble for Africa created a fertile ground for ethnic and political tensions. Dividing groups with long histories of animosity and lumping together diverse ethnicities with little in common created a recipe for conflict. Civil wars, coups, and border disputes became all too common in post-colonial Africa. The legacy of colonialism continued to cast a long shadow over the continent, hindering its development and stability. Section 8, Africa's Renaissance. Despite these challenges, there is hope. Across Africa, a new generation is rising, determined to shape its own destiny. Economic growth in many parts of the continent offers a glimmer of promise. Democracy, though fragile in some places, is taking root. The African Union, a continental body aimed at promoting unity and cooperation, is working to address the challenges facing the continent. From investing in education and infrastructure to promoting peace and security, African nations are taking charge of their own future. Section 9. Uncovering the Untold Stories. The story of the Scramble for Africa is a reminder of the importance of understanding history. It's a story that forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about colonialism and its enduring impact. But it's also a story about resilience, resistance, and the enduring human spirit. I encourage you to delve deeper into this complex and fascinating history. Learn about the kingdoms and empires that thrived before colonialism. Discover the stories of the individuals and movements that fought for freedom and justice. By understanding the past, we can help to create a better future for Africa and its people.